Love is one of those mysteries that doesn't always make sense. At times, it feels like the most comforting thing on earth, gentle, warm, and full of joy. But just as easily it can catch you off guard and leave your heart aching. Anyone who's truly allowed themselves to feel love knows it's not always simple. It can light up your world, but it can also leave you feeling exposed, unsure, and deeply shaken. Have you ever felt so close to someone that it was like they were woven into the fabric of your daily life, only to watch them slowly fade away? No argument, no real goodbye, just a gradual quiet. The texts stop, the energy changes, they begin to vanish into silence, and you're left staring at the empty space they once filled, wondering how something so meaningful could just vanish without explanation. Most people see that kind of silence as the end. They assume the love must have been one-sided, that maybe it was never as real as they thought. But what if that distance isn't about fading feelings at all? What if it's actually the result of love going too deep, too fast? Carl Jung, a legendary figure in psychology, believed that the hidden parts of ourselves, the pain, the fear, the wounds we've buried, don't just stay buried. They show up in our closest connections, especially when love moves from surface level to something more raw, more vulnerable, more real. In this video, we're going to uncover the real reasons someone might start pulling away just when things begin to feel right, why they go quiet even though they still care, and why their silence may have more to do with their inner struggle than anything you did wrong. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you might see love and loss through an entirely new lens. Love, when it's real, doesn't just bring comfort, it brings intensity. It has a way of waking up something inside of us that we didn't even realize was sleeping. Real love doesn't just make us feel warm or wanted. It shines a light into parts of us we usually keep hidden, even from ourselves. Carl Jung once explained that when a relationship reaches a certain emotional depth, it doesn't just engage our thoughts or our feelings, it stirs the unconscious. And that's where things get interesting, and often complicated, because when we truly fall in love, when the bond runs deep, it stops being just about connection. It becomes a reflection. Suddenly, we're not just seeing the other person, we're seeing ourselves through them, our insecurities, our fears, the disappointments we swore we had already moved past. They all rise up. We begin to feel exposed, and the closer that person gets to our heart, the more we realize just how many unhealed places we still carry. It's not because love is wrong, it's because love is real. And real love has a way of opening doors that we've spent a lifetime keeping closed. The person we care about becomes a kind of mirror, a mirror that reflects not just the best in us, but the parts we try to keep tucked away. Maybe it's the fear of not being enough. Maybe it's the fear of being left behind. For some, it's the belief that if you let someone in too far, you'll end up losing control, losing your identity, or worse, getting hurt. And when those fears begin to whisper in the background, a protective instinct kicks in. That's when you might notice them starting to pull back. They get quieter. They cancel plans. They seem distracted or emotionally distant. You start wondering, did I do something wrong? But the truth is, this kind of withdrawal isn't always about what's happening between you. More often, it's about what's happening inside of them. The love hasn't disappeared. It's just become too much for them to hold, because not everyone knows how to stand in front of that mirror. Not everyone is ready to be seen that fully, that honestly. And so, even though their heart may still be in it, their unconscious mind begins to resist. It sends signals to retreat, not out of malice, not out of manipulation, but out of emotional survival. It's the kind of fear that doesn't shout, it whispers. It says, "This is getting too close. This is getting too real. I don't know how to do this." The hardest part is, their conscious mind might still want you, they might miss you, but something deeper in them, the part shaped by past wounds and unresolved pain, is telling them to step back. And when that happens, it's not love that disappears. It's just that the love has reached a depth they've never had to face before, and facing it feels like standing too close to a fire. So instead of risking getting burned, they move away. Not because they don't love you, but because the love touched something they weren't ready to deal with. And until they learn to stand in front of that mirror without flinching, their instinct will always be to look away. We don't often realize it, but real emotional closeness, true intimacy, can feel just as threatening as it is comforting. We talk about wanting deep connection, about finding someone who really sees us, but being seen in that way isn't easy for everyone, because emotional closeness isn't just about bonding with another person, it's about being fully exposed. And for someone who has lived through heartbreak, betrayal, or abandonment, that kind of exposure can feel downright dangerous. When someone pulls away emotionally, it's easy to assume they've lost interest. But many times even they don't fully understand what they're feeling. There's a voice inside them, one they may not be able to name, that begins to whisper doubts, fears, and warnings. Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we don't want to deal with, the pain, the insecurity, the fear, don't stay buried. They resurface through the people we connect with, especially when those relationships touch something deep inside us. That's why the most intense connections often trigger the most emotional chaos. Your love didn't make them run, it simply brought their old wounds to the surface, wounds they may have spent years ignoring. In a strange way, your presence might be what made them feel again, and that can be overwhelming. You didn't cause the fear, but your love revealed it. And for someone who isn't ready to face that truth, stepping back feels safer than moving forward. So even if they still care, even if they miss you, their instinct might still be to create space, not because they want to lose you, but because they're afraid of losing control of themselves. They're afraid of how deeply they feel when they're with you. And that fear can convince them that distancing themselves is the only way to stay safe. That's the paradox. When love runs deep, it can open emotional doors that were never meant to stay closed, and the more someone feels, the more exposed they become. For someone who's spent their life protecting their emotions, vulnerability doesn't feel freeing. It feels like standing on the edge of something they're not sure they can survive, so they retreat, not because of who you are, but because of what they feel around you. You represent something powerful, not just a partner, but a mirror, and that reflection can be too raw, too honest. Too much for them to face just yet. Their emotional withdrawal isn't a measure of how little they care. It's a measure of how unprepared they are to confront what love has brought to the surface. And until they're ready, closeness will feel more like a risk than a reward. This is the part that stings the most. When someone you love begins to drift away, the instinct is to hold on tighter. You want to close the gap, fix the silence, find some kind of answer. It's only natural. When you feel someone slipping through your fingers, your first reaction might be to chase them, to ask what happened, to try and bring back what you had. But here's the hard truth. The more you chase someone who is emotionally withdrawing, the more it confirms the very fear that made them pull away in the first place. For someone who feels overwhelmed by closeness, your pursuit, even if it comes from a place of love, can feel like pressure, and pressure triggers retreat. The moment they sense you're trying to bring them back before they're ready, they feel cornered, misunderstood, emotionally exposed in a way they weren't prepared for. That's when the distance grows even wider, not because they don't care, but because fear has taken the lead again, and fear always chooses escape over resolution. So what can you do when someone you love pulls away? You stand still, with love, not with anger. You don't chase, but you don't close your heart either. You don't beg for attention, and you don't shut down. You let them step back, and you stay rooted in your own strength. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to chase or fix. It's to respect the space they think they need without letting it shatter your sense of self. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It does. It means being able to sit with the pain without trying to erase it by forcing connection. It means understanding that their silence is not a measure of your worth. It's a reflection of what they haven't dealt with yet. And if they come back, if they return with more clarity, more self-awareness, and a willingness to truly engage, you'll know it's real. You'll know they didn't come back because you chased them, but because they chose to come back on their own, from a place of growth. And if they don't come back, you didn't lose, because you didn't shrink to fit someone else's fear. You stayed true to your heart, your love, your dignity, and that matters more than you know. Growth doesn't always look like a happy ending with someone else. Sometimes it looks like standing tall after someone walks away and realizing that you're still whole. Letting go of someone who isn't ready doesn't mean giving up on love. It means you're honoring yourself enough to stop fighting for someone who isn't ready to fight beside you. And that quiet strength, that grace, is where real power lives. Here's what you need to hold on to. Sometimes, when someone you love pulls away or starts ignoring you, it's not because they stopped loving you. It's because the love became too much, too deep, too real. Love has a way of opening doors inside us that we've spent years trying to keep shut. And when those doors swing open, not everyone knows how to handle what comes pouring out. The discomfort of being seen, of being felt, of truly being connected, it can be overwhelming. For some people, it's easier to step back than to stay present. It's easier to disappear than to deal with the emotions that surface when they're close to you. Their distance may feel personal, but often it's about a battle they're fighting inside themselves, a battle you didn't cause and one you cannot fix. It is not your responsibility to heal what someone else isn't ready to face. You can't love someone into emotional safety. If they're not willing to stand in it with you, what is your responsibility is how you respond to that silence, how you care for yourself in the absence, how you honor the love you gave because that love was real, even if the other person couldn't. Hold it. Maybe their silence left you wondering what was wrong with you, but maybe that silence gave you something else. 2. A clearer view of who you are, of what you deserve, of how strong you've become, because real love isn't always gentle or easy. Sometimes it shakes you, it challenges your sense of worth, and sometimes it doesn't stay, not because it was meaningless, but because it was meant to show you something before it left. Carl Jung once said that the most meaningful relationships aren't about comfort, they're about growth, transformation. Becoming more of who we really are through the way we love and through the way we lose. If someone came into your life and touched your heart in a way you'll never forget, even if they're no longer there, don't see that as a failure. Ask yourself, what did I learn about myself because of them? What did I see in me that I hadn't noticed before? If you've made it through this much pain and you're still standing, maybe a little bruised, but more awake, more aware, then you haven't lost. You've grown, you've evolved, and that's a kind of love story too, the one where you don't shrink when someone else pulls away, but instead rise to meet yourself more fully. If you've ever been through this kind of emotional distance with someone you cared about, and you're still trying to make sense of it, type truth in the comments so others know they're not alone. What part of this message stayed with you most? Share it below. I read every word, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this gave you any clarity, peace, or strength, I hope you'll like and subscribe. There's more healing where this came from. Let's keep building emotional strength, wisdom, and connection together.